habit and memory and pattern, I think, is like the area where yoga and neuroscience are the most overlapping. Like it's just so, it's just, it seems the same, and even in this discussion, he says it's clear that memory is, memories are the basis of samskara. And then today we're going to look at how those are literally what they are, in the physical realm. Pandit Rajmani says that every thought, every mental movement makes an impression on the mind, and each impression contains the qualities and characteristics of the thought construct that created it. With each repetition, the impression becomes deeper and more pronounced. And in yoga, these deeply embedded subtle impressions are known as samskara. So we're going to talk about samskara today. Samskaras are the products of our thoughts, and our thoughts are the products of our mind. The undisciplined mind is at the mercy of the senses and may be pulled this way and that by the senses. And we want to kind of gain more clarity and control over our actions rather than being pulled by the senses. We all might be looking at the same thing with our senses, but our perception is completely colored by what we like and what we don't like, and what our past experience is, and what our memories are about the sort of thing we're looking at or hearing. Our memories are really not that accurate. And again, that comes to using your senses, using discernment and clarity of the mind to see things as they really are, see your past patterning and experiences, and see how those are coloring your current and future actions and perceptions. Memory and patterns don't just color your perception or your action, your behavior. They are the way your mind works. Your mind works according to these habits and patterns. So that's part of why we want to become aware of our samskara, and we may so choose to repattern or to unearth and sort of purify certain patterns or memories if they're an obstacle. That the more what they call emotional tone there is to an event, if it's traumatic, if it's exciting, if there's any, whether it's positive or negative emotion, if there's strong emotion associated with an event, the memory will be deposited more strongly. We have genetics, which is we all have this set of genes that's inside, our DNA, that's in every cell of our body, and then you inherited half your DNA from your mother and half from your father. And that code, that DNA code, is pretty much set in your body. Like your DNA is going to stay pretty much the same for your whole life, except for if you have mutations, which might take the form of cancer or, skin damage, things like that. But pretty much your genes are set, like your code is set. But epigenetics is the influence on your genes through your life by experiences. So every experience, and this is a big part of what we think in neuroscience and in biology in general, what we think samskara and patterns are. It's not just, we're going to talk about the neurophysiology, but it also has an effect on your genes. It doesn't change the code of the DNA per se. It's made up of A, C, T, G. So the code doesn't change. It doesn't mutate your genes necessarily, but it puts little proteins on the outside of the DNA that determine whether genes get turned on or turned off. So protein is made from DNA, and all of the protein is like all the molecules in our body that run everything. So whether a certain molecule protein is being made or not depends on epigenetics, and that is ruled by experience. The really trippy thing about epigenetics is that it travels generations. You can actually have not a mutation, not an influence on your genetic code, but an influence from your parent or even your grandparents' experience on your genes' activity 2 generations later, which is wild, and maybe longer, we don't know. But it's documented at least 2 generations, and of course, just like, the strongest patterns are those that are the most associated with attachment and emotion. So trauma is, of course, has, one of the strongest impressions on, epigenetically, on future generations. So you may have, and things like stress, chronic stress, impoverished, whether it's sensory or nutritional, things like that. disease, all these things can have an effect for several generations. So that's where you really, I mean, and people talk about generational trauma. It's real. It's a real physical thing. Really, and this is what yoga says, svadhyaya with self-introspective study, become aware of the patterns and, and again, then we'll see, well, we can work to change them.